That was a 320.
The 320. Is that what the 249 is from?
The 249 is exactly. That's a 249. That's where you get the 249.
So where's my phone? Because Sekiro did send me the
That's where you get the 249 from. The principle is then
I think it was energy behind it. I would do.
But they're looking for is so you know they just call for the
Is it? But it's got to be granted.
those things.
Made his life a little bit more interesting.
No, indirectly to make it.
GS here.
Okay, so I need to position it maybe like so. See, this is.
Okay.
Huh? It just needs to. You see, but now you can't get everybody in. It's just. Can you hold it? Hi, James. Yeah, but now we're trying to settle the camera. We can't settle the camera.
Yeah,
But now, see, you're not seeing everybody.
I know. That's because it's just got their heads. So if I come and
Okay,
sit,
Is that okay? James, are you seeing?
The GS is behind.
Yeah, all the neighborhoods. Can you make that thing wide or no?
I just drove a car.
Oh, it's only that.
It's taking me to.
So that means every time somebody, but then it's the sound, remember? Because I don't have sound.
See, if you find
Okay. But like when everybody else is speaking, then I would have to go like this, right? But then you see, you don't even get all the banners.
We're actually using that to support it. This is our bus, but we're letting
And then
them borrow
they
it.
won't hear. That I remember.
The school project.
I mean,
What do you want to do? When do you want to start? Everyone that we need to be here is here.
yeah, no, it's not 3 o'clock yet.
Okay. Just tell me when you want me to get everyone to sit down.
Well, 4 minutes is 3.
Well, I use faith. I don't know.
Should we offer anyone a drink or something before they sit or after? Okay, bye.
Where's Moska?
Yeah, right here.
just looking for biscuits.
Do you want to biscuit?
That's part of it.
Would you like any tea to drink before you start? Everybody okay? Do you want any more tea to drink? We're going to start in a few minutes. Do you want something to drink or you good?
I should have eaten.
Well, come quickly, grab a sandwich.
No, but I take time to.
Okay, I'm going to choose your selection. How does that
Yeah, there's no 7 day 1 liter.
just bug you over the weekend and
It's lovely. So the number. I've also no.
You know that the
Where's your seat there?
In the corner.
Oh, in the corner.
so basically everything.
Can I also make?
Lisa, man, you see this
I'm just jealous.
You want a cappuccino? I think the
last
one.
Okay, just black coffee.
But it's Nescafe.
Espresso thing, not
I must say, Ricky can sit here. You see us? It's a union.
This was your idea. This press
Who was hungry?
No, I'm saying, why are you guys
Must I keep quiet?
No sugar. No, I knew you told you. I just wanted to be next to my thing. So I'm busy. That's all. I was going to chase away employers. Don't worry. I didn't say mine.
I've got Valeria on the phone. Want to know after what hours is this conference going to be?
Maybe 30 minutes.
It's going to be 30, 40 minutes.
Bitte?
Did you have
Say
meetings?
30, 40 minutes.
How do you manage it? No, it's urban German. It's urban. Urban's going to sit here.
Sorry for the camera.
No, urban must sit here.
He wants to be close to this.
No.
He wants to feel.
Yes, you can put it there.
Just make sure you got the right thing in front of you.
Again, something they know him.
I received a call from Vusima. I don't know. And Vus was congratulating me, so you guys mustn't think negative.
Let's go together.
He was congratulating me for everything.
Hi, where's the link for this? Because it's obviously a different type, so let me send it up.
Apparently yesterday.
Because the girls in the office are not getting it.
Judgment like this.
It's fine. I'm a good waitress.
First and last time.
I'm an associate. It's me. No, I want black.
We want plain.
Looking good. Like, this is what I want.
I can't move the closer to my chair. I don't want to see
Okay.
So, I'm putting up. I like how you just say, I do not like Go to the video lab call.
Can I get anyone
Upaks ukhona kuthiwa kumntu epaks hayi inkomo bendiphinde niyenze ngomnyunya ixesha nayifunda lathi ndathi
I know one day we'll have
Anyone else?
You can take it.
the lion is running away with a piece of meat and they're like laughing like, I was watching. We came and went, that's what happened.
You chose. See, so the cameras are on,
That's fine.
so for the moment it's on, so when everybody else is talking to one,
Whoever is talking, use the camera. My hand.
it's between
The main people that will be Ellis and myself. Okay, we're going to start.
Thanks, sweetheart.
Dr. Elias, look up. Thank you.
Please talk loud. When you're talking, talk loud so we can hear you. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon to the media, to the public who may be joining us this afternoon. If I could just take an opportunity, a short moment, just to introduce everyone. My name is Lucia Trentini. I'm the CEO of SEIFSA. To my right is Mr. Elias Monachi. He's the president of SEIFSA, the employer federation that represents 18 independent employer organizations that belong to the Steel and Engineering Industries Federation of South Africa. Next to Mr. Monachi is Mr. Irvin Jim, the General Secretary of the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa. Next to Mr. Jim is Trevor. Trevor from the South African Equity Workers Association. And next to the South African Equity Workers Association is Mr. Rick Grobler, who represents UASA, the trade union. To my left is Daniel van der Merwe, who is the Operations Director for the Consolidated Employers Organization, the CEO, who is also a signatory to the Collective Main Agreement. And to his left is Peter Madego, who is the Deputy General Secretary of MEWUSA. So we have invited you this afternoon just to come and hear a little bit about some of the recent developments that have happened over the last couple of days with regards to the process that is unfolding in respect of the collective main agreement, which is in the process of being challenged by two employer organizations in the industry, the South African Engineers and Founders Association and the National Employers Association of South Africa, NIASA. There was a very important court case that was heard about 2 weeks ago, and judgment was tabled last week, Wednesday, and the nub of the judgment is that the signatories to the main agreement are absolutely well within their right to continue in their efforts to process the collective main agreement and make it an agreement that is legally binding on all employers and all employees operating in the iron, steel, engineering and metallurgical industry. Obviously this would include sectors of the industry that have their own agreements, like the Plastic Converters Association, who for the first time in over a decade have concluded a deal with the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, and that plastics agreement will be extended in due course to all employers operating under the scope and jurisdiction of the MEIBC insofar as the plastics industry is concerned. Other companies like the Lift, other companies and other group of employers who may have negotiated their own deals continue to operate, like for example the Lift industry agreement, what we commonly refer to as house agreements. Companies like Columbus Stainless, Eiffel Steel, Unit Aluminium, etc. They have for many, many years concluded their own mini, what we call house agreements, and those house agreements are excluded from the scope of application of the main agreement. The main agreement is about extending minimum terms and conditions of employment to all employers and all employees operating in the iron, steel, engineering and metallurgical industry, who are not covered by a house agreement or a sector agreement. And this is something that we are aiming to do for the first time in over 10 years. And we believe that that is the purpose of centralized collective bargaining. It is why we have bargaining councils, and it is why organizations that are challenging this attempt on the part of employers seeking gazettal and extension participate on bargaining councils. But enough from me for the time being. I'm going to hand over to my colleagues and comrades to the right, Mr. Monarchy, who is the chairman of the SEIFSA board and SEIFSA president, and then I'm sure he'll be followed by Mr. Irvin Jim, and then we will then see where the conversation leads us from there. Mr. Monarchy.
Thanks, Lucio. I'll be short and brief and precise to the point. The reason why we call this joint media conference is to outline the recent landmark judgment from the Labour Court. I'm saying it's a landmark because after 11 years, as an industry, we didn't have an agreement that is extended to cover the entire industry. The second thing is that before the agreement is gazetted, the bargaining council should pass a resolution so that that resolution will then form the basis for the submission to the minister for the gazettal. Now, the two employer organizations, they deem fit to apply for an agent court interdict so that that process should then be set aside, and they failed in their endeavor for the agreement not to be submitted for gazettal to the Department of Labour and Employment. Thirdly, their failure to do that, it then triggers an interesting scenario, because now the Department of Labour and Employment then issue a gazette for a period of 21 days for submissions to be made by various organizations in an intention whether to oppose the extension or not to oppose the extension, and the period will basically lapse on the 13th of September, not this week, sometimes next week. Now, the fourth point for us, I guess, because there is no basis for the agency from the two employer organizations that challenges the extension of this agreement or the resolution thereof. It then means that we are confident as the employer organization that the process, despite the fact that they might then challenge it down the road, but it is our submission that the agreement will be gazetted for the first time after 11 years. And the purpose of the extension is to deal with harmonization of condition of service so that everybody in the industry comply with the minimum standards as outlined in the main agreement. And also it then gives the bargaining council the authority and the ability to deal with compliance and enforcement in an event where companies are not complying with the provisions of the agreement. And the last point is so that the employers in the main they do not compete on the basis of cheap labor or low cost wages, so to speak. So, and I think we are happy that the process, the road ahead for us, it will then deal with the harmonization of the condition of service in the industry, and the agreement will then be extended to cover everybody. Some of the issues in the agreement, some of you might recall, is that there are various provisions for an exemption. There are provisions for phasing in period for companies that for the past 11 years they're not paying industry minimum. So those are some of the issues that the bargaining council will be in a position to deal with and dispense with once the agreement is then extended. And I think I will then hand over to Ivan Jim, the Secretary General of NUMSA.
Well, thanks Elias. I think few points to make. I think the first one is that as trade unions, and if I were to say that trade unions are voluntary organizations, NUMSA is a prime mass organization which derives its mandate from its members. Some people would argue that trade unions are reformist in character. That's why I can share a platform with employer associations, because we would have done what is necessary, which is a historical duty as a union, which is to negotiate for benefits and conditions of workers, improve their condition, we secure an agreement. But there has been a historical setback in this industry for a period of about 11 years, as Elias is saying, where whatever agreement we sign, a small group, bunch of employers, very conservative, backward. I don't want to say much. In the US today, the country is under siege out of fascism. But I would have consistently, even as we pursued strike in the industry as a last resort, to say we are normal people. We represent normal workers. And therefore, there should be no employers in the sector who choose to go to conservative employer associations, wouldn't believe in humanity, wouldn't treat workers as complete human beings. And I must say, in so saying, I always recruit for SEIFSA, that employers who care for stability and everything else in the industry, they must join SEIFSA, because if NUMSA, it's time for negotiations, we negotiate benefits and conditions, and if the agreement has been reached, it must then be gazetted by Department of Labor and be extended to non-parties. This group of employers, if anything they did, and as I say, for a period of almost 11 years, have just been to sabotage and leaving vulnerable, poor workers in small, medium-sized companies, in big companies, not to be able to receive increases. With the extension of this agreement, with the victory we have secured in court, we now want to call to Minister of Labor, Comrade Tulas Lesi, to move with speed and do what is in the ANC policy that regard the workers and the working class as a motive force of change. That he must quickly gazette the agreement, make sure that it is extended to non-parties, so that workers in the wide engineering sector can receive increases. These are workers who have not received increases for years now. Workers in the plastic sector, with the compromise and the negotiation we've done, it's not the best agreement ever, but those workers in plastic who have not received an increase purely because they are NUMSA members, they will also receive an increase. So I must say that in shutting up, this is a watershed moment. This agreement, this victory against NIESA, led by Pap and Fus, who must be isolated in the industry for a destructive agenda, it is a watershed in the best interest of workers. This agreement is not about politicking and everything else. What it will deliver is to give increases to workers who have not received increases for years, who are ravaged by high inflationary pressures. And we think that we needed to be here today to say this victory belongs to workers. And we have done it. And I must say, we had to have bilaterals with different employers who finally came on board and agreed that there's nothing wrong with signing this agreement and extend it to non-parties in the best interest, because not just for workers, but for employers in the industry, it deals with the fact that there could be an unfair competition where others are paying cheap wages, others are paying higher wages. They would have to normalize so that there's a fair competition that takes place in the industry. Thank you very much.
So if I can lead on from the point of a watershed agreement. Regrettably, last year we had to go through a 3-week strike, which is in no one's best interest, because quite frankly, when there's a strike in the industry, no one wins. But it got us to the point where we were able to conclude an agreement. That agreement is binding for 3 years, from the 1st of July last year until the 30th of June 2024. And that agreement contains a number of unprecedented developments not seen in our industry for the last 30 years, and quite frankly not seen in any other sector that has a bargaining council where trade unions and employers negotiate. I want to make the point that negotiations with our colleagues from all the unions are difficult. The fact that you see us all sitting here this afternoon and smiling and having a cup of coffee and water, that's all well and fine. Because when pressure presents itself in the form of the legal challenge that we are now confronted with, organized labor and business will bunker behind the same set of objectives to ensure that this industry can survive the immediate challenges that we are faced with, and we can introduce and reinforce and bolster an atmosphere that is founded on certainty, stability, and industrial peace. Getting back to the watershed elements of this deal, for the first time in 30 years, my trade union negotiating partners have agreed that increases last year, this year, and next year will be awarded on a rand and cent amount. Not increases on actual rates of pay, but increases on a rand and cent amount calculated on the minimum rates that will be published by the Department of Labour soon. Secondly, we acknowledge and we accept that for many employers who have been operating outside of the centralised collective bargaining arena, it may be a big ask to come on board and straight away start paying 100% of the rates contained in the current agreement. We acknowledge that, the unions at this table acknowledge that, and we have agreed to a special phase-in dispensation. And this is a special phase-in dispensation. Employers that cannot afford to pay the rates that will be published in due course have an opportunity to apply for a special phase-in exemption to pay 60% of the 2020 rate, which is, let me just confirm, is 29 Rand and 73 cents per hour by the 30th of June 2024. Now that is an unprecedented concession that organised labour has agreed to in order to create a level playing field for everyone. 29 Rand 73 per hour for a labourer who spends 8 hours a day working on a shop floor, ensuring that the wheels of industry keep on turning, amounts to 5,000 Rand per month. I know that our competitors are putting the documentation and propaganda out in the industry where they're talking about rates that are breaching and reaching almost 100 Rand per hour for a general labourer. I can assure you, to whoever is listening to us this afternoon, that that is not the case. There are various exemption arrangements available in the existing collective agreement to apply for an exemption from a lesser increase, for an exemption to defer increases, for an exemption to give what you can afford, or for an exemption to give zero. And more importantly, the special phase-in dispensation, which allows those employers to pay the 2020 rate, 60% of the 2020 rate, which is 29 Rand 73, by the 30th of June 2024. Don't ask me how we were able to reach that concession, but I can tell you that it was hard work. It was on the back of a 3-week strike, and it is in the best interest of centralised collective bargaining. That's why we have a bargaining council in this industry. That's why we haggle and fight and argue with one another, and that's why we do deals. I want to just put it in context. The two employer organisations that are challenging the view of the majority fly in the face of not just our constitution, which recognises the right to engage in collective bargaining, but flies in the face of the Labour Relations Act, which is founded on majoritarianism. These two employer organisations collectively represent 25% of all employees employed by all the employer organisations on our bargaining council. The balance that are signatories to the main agreement, namely the independent, individual 18 employer associations, plus the Consolidated Employers Organisation of South Africa, represent in excess of 60.7% of all employees employed by all the employer organisations on the bargaining council. This is an expression of the desire of the majority over the wants of the minority. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is called democracy. I'm not sure if any of my other colleagues want to make any further comments. Peter, I'll start with you.
Okay. I think for us as MEUSA and as Labour again, this is also a milestone, a landmark case by SEIFSA, by Labour, meaning NUMSA, SAIWA, WASA, and others. Look, it's important what they've done, and this is going to bring stability in the industry. Starting from factory level, it's going to motivate employees to start delivering for the employer. It's going to give morale to the employees. Why are we saying this is that in every company where NIASA and SEIFSA is represented, when you arrive there, you'll find that an employee is still earning below the breadline. This is embarrassing because honestly, if an employee in that company with the price of bread being in the level of 20 rand, and for 3 years an employee has not been given an increment, it's very heartbreaking. So we want to pride ourselves with what happened at the labor court and what happened and what is happening right now. So we're very proud of what we did previously by having sleepless nights as labor and as employers. We had sleepless nights. We were doing a teamwork because our enemy by that time was NIASA and SEIFSA. So we're very proud of what transpired. The previous speakers have already mentioned that, look, the sabotage which was done and which happened previously, I think for now we are very proud in saying the sabotage is not going to happen going forward. Even if they can challenge, but the sabotage is not going to be happening, and they will be aware from now that we know them, that they are enemies of the industry. Thank you.
I'm going to ask my colleague to the left, Mr. Daniel van der Merwe, who's the collective bargaining representative for the CEO. The CEO is a co-signatory to the main agreement. They have in excess of 670 members that operate in the iron, steel, engineering and metallurgical industry, who employ in excess of 14,000 employees. So they're a significant stakeholder and a supporter of the collective main agreement and a friend to centralized collective bargaining.
Thank you, Lucho. Yeah, from CEO's side, we generally represent small to medium enterprises. And I think, you hit the nail on the head just now by saying that this is a watershed moment, for organized labor and employers alike. And I think, from a CEO point of view, the collective agreement and what has been achieved here really shows the balance that can be achieved between socio-economic needs as well as employers' needs in terms of competition at the end of the day. So, CEO supports the agreement, as can be seen by us being a signatory. And I think it's a one-of-a-kind agreement, and it definitely shows what can be done when parties cooperate. Thanks.
Thank you, Daniel. I just want to stress the point before I ask Rick at the end of the table from UASA and possibly Trevor if they want to say a few things, then we'll end off with Mr. Monachi and Mr. Jim. The enemy in this industry is not SEIFSA nor NIASA. The enemy in this industry is unemployment, inequality, poverty, and now hunger. We have an obligation, or we have a heavy duty, responsibility, and obligation to avoid these petty squabbles and fights about things that we have the right to pursue. We accept that our critics and our competitors may also wish to exercise their right to object, but let's do it in a constructive manner. There are deeper issues facing this industry. This industry today employs 217,000 factory workers. When I joined this industry 32 years ago, this industry employed close to 500,000 workers. Workers that leave our industry are not joining the tourism industry or immigrating to New Zealand or going to Australia. Workers who leave this industry become part of the unacceptably high levels of unemployment. We need to rise above the petty squabbles and fights amongst employer organizations and employers and trade unions and really find a platform for us to have a conversation in a climate of stability, industrial peace, and certainty around real challenges underpinning this sector. If I can then ask Rick, and then Trevor, and then we'll end off with the two gentlemen on my right.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to add a lot to the history that was said. I just want to mention that from our side, we support the extension. We've done so from the beginning, and we welcome the recent judgment. We do believe that having these agreements extended is in the interest of industry peace and stability. And that is always something to strive for everyone's sake. Thank you.
Right, as SAIWA, we're very much happy for the achievement. I think it should be noted that central bargaining is of importance, that no one is underprivileged or abused. And once we sit on the table, employers and labor, and reach an agreement, it makes industrial peace where both parties will benefit. And looking at the previous years, it means all the employees that did not get any increase for 3 or 5 years or so are living on overdraft, taking into consideration the inflation rate that we have. It means they've been sent to go and make loans, live life that is not worth. And I think it is important that once we centralize, we encourage that everybody and discourage that our members also should live on loans. So if we have the same and equal salary and increases, it will stabilize this industry. And I think it's worth a little.
Thank you. Madam Program Director standing behind the laptop, before we ask the two gentlemen to my right for closing comments, are there any questions that we can answer?
No questions.
No questions. Then I'll ask the two gentlemen just to make one or two closing comments. Labour leads.
Okay. Now I'll say one or two things. I think the one, I hope that this groundbreaking defeat, I think we shouldn't be playing about it. It's a defeat of NIESA and SEIFSA attempt to block the extension of the agreement. I hope it could redirect their negative energies to positive energies. Somebody says they are not necessarily enemies. We agree. They chose, though, to be a stumbling block to whatever progress in the industry. I think that if the journey of 1,000 miles start with a single step, I wish this could be their first journey to appreciate that they must come back to the industry and work with us constructively. Because I think the real momentary issue that we should be focusing on is to put pressure on government to do away with austerity measures, to embark on an expansionary budget, to put together a stimulus package for this industry, to ensure that we build infrastructure so that the necessary jobs that are needed, our people are swimming in poverty, in unemployment, and inequalities, and they need jobs. And there's no strategic industry if government were to come up with a clear stimulus package that is well positioned to create those jobs more than the engineering sector, that we happen to come up with an agreement which is fair under the condition. And I think that that's what I would communicate, in that we should be refocusing our energies to government playing its role to intervene in the economy, to stimulate economic growth, to create the most necessary jobs. And there's no well-placed industry strategically like the engineering sector.
Thanks, Mr. I guess for us, the key question posed in the gazettal of the agreement is how do we rebuild this industry forging ahead? Because in the absence of the demands, in the absence of infrastructure budget, in the absence of localization, local content, the question of reskilling and training of the workers in terms of meeting the new demands imposed by the 4IR, it then becomes a critical issue. And hence I'm saying the road ahead is basically to rebuild the industry. How do we hold hands jointly between the unions and the employer organization to redefine the new challenges so that this industry needed to prosper and employ people so that we then have a stable employment relations in the engineering industry. That is for us a critical aspect that needs to be considered going ahead. And thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Malachi. Thank you to my colleagues, Peter, Daniel, myself, Elias, Irvin, Trevor, and Rick for finding some time at very short notice to attend this press conference. Watch this space as the saga unfolds. I have no doubt that this is not the end. This is not the end, but the beginning of a process. And I'd like to just reinforce what my president and chairman of my board has said. We all have to do whatever we can to build this industry.